Hello, welcome back. All right, today is chapter 12. So, comfy, get started. Chapter 12, Love and Lovecraft. The next morning, quite unexpectedly, Mr. Blackwood rapped upon the front door and caused my mother to scurry about like a startled hare, gathering biscuits and cheese and tea and fruit, while I was set across from him in the parlor like a prize pig on display at the fair. I smiled to him. He smiled to me. Mamma fluttered and fussed around us, and when she'd assembled a small feast, he bid my mother to leave, for he wished to speak with me in private. Her departure was, to say the least, a curious mix of eagerness and reluctance, with both her hands clasped at her chest, like a greedy child about to open an oversized Christmas gift. When the door closed and the latch clicked, any kindness in his face vanished. Blackwood affixed me with his terrible gaze. "You know why I am here," he said. "Our conversation of last night was interrupted," I replied. "You were remiss in your duties, Miss Lovecraft, and left your post when I had clearly assigned you a task." I felt a flush rise to my cheeks, so I lowered my chin to hide my smile. "And how is our mutual friend today?" Blackwood groaned. "Oh, he pines for you, Harry. It's wretched to watch." His lip curled in disgust. "Once upon a time he was useful, but now he lives only to see you again. It's enough to make anyone of sound mind feel nauseous." "Will you tell him I feel the same?" "No," Blackwood grunted, and with cutting sarcasm added, "I'd lose him completely to your considerable charms. Best to let Nate suffer a little, I think, if it motivates him." Then he glanced at the teapot, then to me, then back to the teapot, brows arched. "Oh, bother." I poured us each a cup of tea. "You wish to know what I discerned while watching your guests," I said as I handed the teacup to him. "And?" "I neither saw, heard, nor felt anything that would lead me to the identity of our culprit," I replied. "But I can say in all certainty that I spotted no terrifying, massive, rag-garbed giants in attendance. Not a single one." "Things are not always as they seem, Harry," he said in a droll tone. "You know that as well as I." "If you're referring to my quirk, then yes, looks can be deceiving." He took up his cup and slurped at the tea, then said, "I was referring to our mutual friend." I took a bit of cheese and savored it before saying, "You may think of him as a mere beast, Mr. Blackwood, but he has the heart of a poet and the mind of a scholar. It is terribly unfair of you to treat him with so little consideration when he clearly possesses every faculty afforded by the presence of a human soul. He is kind, generous, brave. Why, before we visited the pond last night, Nate and I had a conversation, and he warned me against reading any of the books in the library of Northwich Hall." At that, Blackwood fully sputtered and had to put down his cup and dab at his mouth with the sleeve of his coat. "He told you that? He spoke to you?" "He's very clever at communication," I replied, pleased that my comment had flummoxed him. "With a mixture of intentions, actions, and the colors of his skin, he's able to relay quite a bit of information." "What exactly did he tell you?" he said in a patronizing, saccharine sneer. "That I mustn't read any of the volumes in your possession. Can you explain to me, sir, why he wouldn't wish me to read Posy's books?" Blackwood scowled, thinking, weighing out what to tell me. "How well did you know Mr. Posy?" I shrugged. "I was only 5 when they suffered their unfortunate incident. I only remember Mr. Posy a little. He'd come and share long conversations with my father, and drink bottles of brandy, and leave with his head in the clouds to stumble home across the fields." "What would they talk about?" "I don't really know," I replied. "You'll have to ask my father. But Papa was a professor of history, and by looking at the titles of Posy's books, I gathered they had that interest in common." Blackwood weighed this information and then said, "John Posy was a bibliophile, Miss Lovecraft, a lover of books, and the more strange or obscure, the better. His collection is unparalleled." "Is that why you bought Northwich Hall, for the books?" "You have grown up alongside the greatest library in all the Western world," he said. "I would have paid any price to own it. I'll be honest, it took me a very long time to find it, because the dolts of Dunham Village Council were ignorant to the actual value of the property to which they'd been entrusted. Half the books on those shelves were thought lost to civilization forever." "I had no idea," I said. "Nor did they. And I suspect that our mutual friend does not wish for you to stumble across something abominable," he continued. "New ideas are powerful things, Miss Lovecraft. You must take great care when entering Posy's library, for there are dangers lurking on those shelves that you cannot yet comprehend." I frowned. I'm no bubble-headed nitwit, easily overtaken by whims and fantasies, I replied. No, I don't believe you are, Blackwood agreed. But Nate knows better than most how dangerous a book can be. Those ideas can change everything in a moment of weakness. He is afraid for you. Surely he has told you that, too. In a fashion, I replied. I believe, Miss Lovecraft, that someone in the village has read a book that they ought not to have seen, and on the outside they appear just as they always have been, but on the inside they have soured into the most foul and contemptible monstrosity. Up on the heath you saw the creature's true face, but we do not yet know the man to whom it belongs, and that is what we must decipher if we wish to stop the disappearances. But no man can change his form, I said. No, Blackwood laughed at that. Nate would certainly argue that point. I was about to ask questions when the fullness of his statement hit me like an arrow between the eyes. My expression must have been one of utmost shock, for Blackwood grinned in a very satisfied manner. Yes, Miss Lovecraft, just as he has a name, he once had a human face, too, and sometimes he tries to come back, but it's always a terrible catastrophe. You saw an attempt only last night. Blackwood took a biscuit to dip in his tea. Dreadful. A glimpse of his horrid pseudo-human mask gives children nightmares, strikes the elderly with incontinence, and sends cattle into a stampede. I assumed... You assumed he was a devil trying to look like a gentleman, rather than a gentleman trapped in the guise of a devil. Really, Miss Lovecraft, what's the difference? We all have demons lurking in our hearts. He continued in a dry and unimpressed manner, as if discussing the weather rather than the transmutation from man to monster. My half-brother, Nathaniel, has been trapped in this grotesque state for almost 5 years now, and I am often amazed that his despair has not completely overwhelmed his reason. If it was me who had undergone such a terrible transformation, I think I would have gone mad with frustration. No, Nate has such an abundance of sickening cheerfulness, Blackwood scoffed. He has always been a frightful optimist, and meeting you has inspired a return of his overbearingly sunny disposition. The gentleman shuddered in revulsion. Since he first laid eyes upon you on the Vale, you have been his constant interest. Harry this, Harry that, blah, blah, blah. Frankly, I'm sick of hearing about you. I beg your pardon, I said, blinking twice. He possesses the capacity of human speech. Blackwood rolled his eyes. Oh, God. Yes, he won't bloody well shut up. It gets tiresome. The thought of actual, real, honest-to-goodness conversation made me dizzy. My heart soared at the hope of speaking, of sharing conversations, of whispering words to each other. But when does he talk? When he's not an octopus, Mr. Blackwood sneered, as if it was a stupid question for me to ask. Rather hard to hit all the V's and P's with a beak instead of a mouth. My mind reeled. Please, I wish to talk with him. He finds it tiring to take a human shape. He is a man only rarely, and even then he spits and slurs a great deal. Blackwood reclined on the couch. I'll ask, but don't get your hopes up, Harry. He's a disgusting specimen in both of his forms. I rested back against the couch, looking to the fireplace in a daze. How is this possible? Blackwood finished his biscuit. You haven't the faintest inkling of what is possible, Harry, and I doubt you have the imagination to understand it if I told you. I reached out and grabbed his wrist then, and he recoiled, but he didn't push me away. I buried myself down into his emotions like a shipworm, and I found his feelings were brazenly displayed, with nothing hidden from himself or anyone else. Sometimes people keep the worst parts of themselves locked away, but not Aloysius. He was proud that, at his core, he was an angry, resentful man, driven by a greedy and scientific curiosity. His teasing of Nate seemed to be the only happy respite from a life of churning bitterness and depression. Both boys had grown up with a library of cursed books, and they had been inured from the ill effects by their constant exposure to the foul vapors, constantly broadcast day and night. I, too, had shared the same history. A life in the shadow of Northwich Hall had resulted in a vaccination from these insidious emissions, which wafted out of the unholy volumes like a foul stench. That queer malformation had manifested itself differently in all of us, depending upon the cellular fabric of our corporeal frame. For myself, it had heightened my ability to read a person's emotions. For Aloysius Thorne, it had meant an intensified ambition to control the dark mirror energies that leaked into the world, compounded with a clever mind for invention. It had spurred him and inspired him to build tools that would allow him to traverse boundaries not meant for man to cross. For Nate, it meant, "Wait," I said. "Your name is Aloysius Thorne?" He startled as if I'd run a current through him. His goggled eyes flashed open. "Witchcraft," he hissed. "And Nate, he is Nathaniel Blackwood, and you have stolen his surname and his fortune." How can you know all that? He said, bewildered. Is this the nature of your exposure to the books? You've learned to read a man's innermost thoughts? He recoiled, twisting his wrist out of my grip, and his lip curled up in disdain. That is how you've communicated with our mutual friend, and given him hope when there's no hope to be had. It was clear as day, I whispered, stunned by the force and power of the impressions. Your name was there, as if written on a page. And all your sisters are as empathetic as you? I glanced sidelong at him. Yes, I lied. Then I shall make sure to give each of you a wide berth, he replied, standing and adjusting his jacket. Let me warn you, Miss Lovecraft, the books are not safe. I encourage you to keep your distance from them. Many of Poesy's most unique volumes were not written by human hands, and they emit foul energies that corrupt those who come too close, like the poor Posey family. Madness lies within their pages. Do you understand? I think so. Nate read only a few lines in a single book, and his place in this universe was forever altered, said Blackwood, or was it Thorne, as he walked to the door. And now another person has read from an unholy book and been lost to humanity. One of Dunham's villagers has been transformed into miscreation for purposes as yet unidentified, and we must beware, for he will wear the face of a friend until it's too late. Be on your guard, Miss Lovecraft, and tell me as soon as you can of any deviations you might see. I promise, I replied, and with that he departed. And that's the end of chapter 12. It was a very short one today. I think I may actually read a second and put it up separately because that was very quick. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you later. Bye!